Namaste and hello, Rukus Avenue Radio listeners. This is your correspondent, Priyadarshini G. Roy. Please check out the acclaimed film Goldfish, out in theaters on September 1st. Visit outsiderpictures.us for more details. And stay tuned for an exclusive interview with the cast and crew coming up only on Rukus Avenue Radio.
Rukus Avenue Radio.
This is Pushan Kripalani on Rukus Ave Radio. Please check out my new film Goldfish, out in theaters on September the 1st. Visit outsiderpictures.us for more details.
Namaste and hello, Rukus Avenue Radio listeners. This is your correspondent, Priyadarshini G. Roy. We are live here today via Zoom. I have the honor of speaking with the director of Goldfish, Pushan Kripalani. Pushan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much. Good to be here.
Great. Without further ado, I'm going to go straight into the bio. A director, cinematographer, and a theater practitioner, Pushan Kripalani gravitates towards addressing the human condition. He first explored that with his film, The Threshold, and is delving into it further with his second directorial piece, Goldfish, releasing this Friday, September 1st. Goldfish revolves around a mother and a daughter and their difficult relationship. In the film, when the daughter is asked to return to her estranged mother, who now suffers from dementia, she returns to a neighborhood she barely remembers and to a mother with fading memories. Pushan, what a wonderful film that I had the pleasure of watching, and now the whole world will also be attuned to.
Well, thank you very much for watching her as closely as you did. And thanks for talking to me. I think it's interesting that films like this that have traction in theaters and even get to see the light of day. In some cases, they don't. And I'm very privileged that the film gets out in many cities in the US and quite a few cities in India as well. And then, of course, it goes on to track worldwide after September the 1st. So it's really a privilege to be part of this process.
Thank you so much for joining us and giving us more of an insight into the creative process that you went to. So my first question for you is that Goldfish features a unique narrative centered around the relationship between a mother and daughter as they navigate the challenges of dementia. What aspects of this storyline resonated with you and drew you to writing this project?
Well, the tagline for the film that we first started out with was dementia, diaspora, and identity. And I think these are three interesting things to tackle within this subject. Dementia, of course, speaks for itself. Everyone's concerned with identity now, and diaspora is very interesting where identity is concerned. Because I think when you're far away from your home country, there is a almost starker view of it, and you become kind of even more Indian if you prefer. That sort of tends to happen when you're far from where you are. So I think an exploration of these themes was very interesting and was sort of revealed to me in sharp relief when I was walking around in Singapore at some point, and was felt othered for a moment, and then suddenly all this sort of sprang up and decided to write a film about it and explore it in greater detail.
That's wonderful. And now, because I've seen the film, I know a little bit about this, but for other audiences, what inspired the title Goldfish for your film? Goldfish
are meant to have sort of 2-second memories or 20-minute memories. No one's really sure. So the world is renewed for them. So that's one lovely thing about that. And of course, dementia is a loss of memory. So at the most fundamental level, that kind of works. The film alludes to a real goldfish in it. So, I mean, in all three respects, it's
thematically present visually and subliminally through the writing and the story presence as well.
Yes. We got a question out of a film festival in New York that says, well, there's no goldfish in the film. I said, well, it's died before the film starts, but there we go.
You spoke about the themes of memory identity. How did you approach that through the storytelling technique, through the different relationships that you showed in this film?
Well, anecdotally, I think I can mention that when exploring the idea of identity and the disappearance of it, if you prefer, dementia is one of those diseases that robs you of your own identity and your sense of self. But the conceit in this film is something different. The conceit is there's a daughter who looks positively Caucasian, because you've seen the film, you know. So she's kind of struggling with her own identity as an Indian British citizen in some ways, is more British than most, and then finds her Indian roots while she's taking care of her mom in some ways. But also the idea of identity being not just held within yourself, but held within the community around you. just like you and I are speaking today, we collide now in this way. And part of my identity and what you think of me and what my interests are rests with you, almost in trust, even beyond my life and beyond my conscious life. And and I thought that was a very powerful and very interesting idea, where a community holds you and your identity, or what it was, in trust almost. And so a community gathers around you in an attempt to preserve both what is and what was.
Yes, I think that's beautifully stated. And when you talk about identities, there's so many different layers that we identify with. And that's evident in the film too, when you speak about Kalki's characterization as a British Indian and someone who, by the looks of it, can be deemed as Caucasian, identity, like just looks wise. But I think it's really important when we talk about identities, not only the identity where we have a daughter who's so trying to forget and a mother who's trying to hold on. And
Correct.
Those clashing viewpoints of how are they connected and how that timeline matches with each other. So I think time plays a huge essence of identity. And specifically because this film is based on the location and setting of COVID-19 in England. And I heard that you guys even shot this during the pandemic. So identities were further, extrapolated and questioned of who am I, what am I, because you are in isolation or with people that you have been trying to avoid, or, Kalki, she's running away from her past, and someone who's, doomed to face her future with her mother. So how do you discuss the challenges you faced during filming and how you guys overcame them with these identity themes?
It's a long and complicated question. I'm going to try and address it. I think in filming, I would imagine I would be accurate in suggesting that we were in a bubble and we got tested every day and all of this. But the masks did an interesting thing with identity. They conceal you.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly you are beginning to look beyond them. It's almost like I suppose, because the masks are now forced on you because of the situation, removing them to be with the people in the neighborhood who you consider part of your bubble while you speak with them, becomes an act of trust outside the realm of the disease itself. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it. It's not overt, because you've seen the film, you know what I mean. It's kind of gently in the background.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with it as we did. And the traumas are not as pronounced, let's say, as a COVID-based picture. It isn't. So I think it lives with and beyond. But I thought that was interesting that you were made to wear a physical mask, which also conceals your identity at one level, does it not? And so you have to look beyond the metaphorical mask as well. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was quite an interesting time to place it because it's just interesting.
I noticed that as well with when you talk about, it's not like a very sad COVID film like we've seen, because there's unexpected humor within the drama that encompasses through dialogue or through unexpected sequences. For example, when Kalki tells her mother, sometimes I tell people I'm adopted. And we think, wow, that's a really heavy, deep accusation to tell your Indian mother living abroad, right? There's so many complexities to that, just one dialogue. And the mother says, so do I. And it's unexpected. Yeah. It's a slight change of humor. And that happens throughout different nuances throughout the film. So how did you balance that blend of drama and humor within the narrative?
Well, I think really serious things discussed lightly land better. I mean, if you look at commercials as an example, if you look at ad films, commercials, you kind of remember the funny ones, and then you remember you don't really remember the serious sort of commercials about, drink this or eat that. But if it's funny, it's a different take. So in some ways, if you want something heavy to land, it's quite interesting that you let the weight of it not be so obvious. And I thought that was kind of a lighter touch approach to serious things that doesn't reduce their impact or seriousness. It actually offers some sort of contrast, which makes the relief more interesting. And I use the word relief in sculpture terms as opposed to relief from a tense situation. So I think that's what we were going for. And I think also, the British are sort of quietly funny people, and I think I am also. So I think it kind of, and Arga, the writer friend that I work with, and I have worked consistently for 25 years, is also kind of darkly funny as well. So, it sort of bleeds in. You can't not. Part of you is always in every picture you make, is it not? Do you not find?
Absolutely. I feel like we subliminally showcase our true selves behind the script, the
The
paper.
work that we do, yes, the
The
work that
3D
we do,
comes out
absolutely.
into, the one-dimensional paper and then again reflected. We live vicariously through those characters or stories and share our
Yeah.
relationship issues through the relationships of others. Now, you touched upon a little bit of the filmmaking aspect of shooting in the pandemic, shooting in England, but specifically because the story is about the mother daughter inside their house. What was that visual filmmaking style? How was that affected during the process of this filmmaking?
Well, we had three cameras at all times, and I shot the film myself as the sort of DOP, and then I had two people who were helping out. My first AC, Muzammil and Miza, who were part of the crew, and they were great. And I can talk about the technical process, but it's kind of redundant because the film is the film.
Mm-hmm.
But what is interesting, I think, about this process is that I didn't light it much at all. It's pretty much natural light. And the interesting thing that happens there is if an actor wants to move wherever an actor wants to move, pre-planned somewhat, but moves nevertheless
Mm-hmm.
within the rehearsal,
Mm-hmm.
the cameras can dance with them to some extent. The cameras can react as opposed to preempt. The camera's always preempting, aren't they? So the camera can react in a way and kind of have this little tango with the actors and create a feel, create a sort of more immediate feel. There's a lot of immediacy in how the film is shot. All the shots aren't perfect; they aren't framed perfectly. So you see, it adds to the reality of the situation. I think it also doesn't have that sort of obvious sort of documentary feel where everything's shaky. So we had the cameras on monopods, and so there's a slightly unsteady kind of. Sometimes the camera is almost canted a little bit because the monopod is trying to find its way through, and in some ways, just to frame it, sort of. And suddenly, that because you've captured it on the fly, or it has that feeling, gives you a sense of reality being captured as opposed to reality being created. So I was hoping for that, and I think that it was quite successful there.
I like that you said that you tried to capture the reality instead of the reality being created. Um,
Mhm.
were there any last moment changes or performances by the actors that were like impromptu camera changes or change your perspective on how to capture within that tight frame of, someone's house or the room?
Yeah, essentially, because the cameras were the people in some ways, it's just a monopod with a person attached to it, really.
Mm-hmm.
If the actor wanted to move in a particular way or in a particular direction during, let's say, the walkthrough or the rehearsal, the cameras would adapt very quickly. And since there's no lighting to sort of stop you, there's no area that you can't go to because, there's sort of a big rig there or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's force. You do it. And so the light drops a little bit, you come back into better light, and then you continue like life,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And that kind of, and because of the sort of digital medium and the flexibility and the portability of these things, you're able to move in a far more organic manner than you were if you had, a 1,500 pound Ariflex on your shoulder. It would be different.
Right, right. You're not restricted as much as you would think that
Not
someone
as
would be
much,
during a
yes.
lockdown.
Correct.
So now moving into more of the relationship dynamics that were depicted in this film. Multi-generational
Oh dear.
households are very
Oh dear.
common in Indian families, especially they feel the effects of any type of mental illness a lot closer than, say, other societies do because we live under the same roof. And Goldfish explores those emotional intricacies. So, what were the challenges that you faced to show that relationship dynamic? Because they are not just living together because of the lockdown, but traditionally, Indian families do tend to live together in multi generational households. So, what was that process like?
Essentially, it's in this case, it's just the one generation that we're looking at. It's the mother to the
Right.
daughter. So that is the core of it. Dementia, which is the reason why she comes back, because her mother sets the house on fire, or the kitchen. She comes back, but she can no longer be trusted to live on her own, and she won't have anybody else in the house. So the daughter returns. That was a force fit, of course, as we've seen. The COVID occurring halfway through the picture was the sort of hot box. Now they've got to be together. When the opportunity arises for the pressure to be released, there's a whole community that gathers around as well to create a different pressure. And then, of course, a resolution creates its own little dynamic. And all these things feed into the idea of what a community is. Because when you're away, to some extent, away from the Indian context, there aren't that many multi-generational households in England, for instance. I mean, they quite quickly adopt the idea that if you're 18 and 19, you get up and you move away. We've all faced it to some extent. And so I think this forcing you into a context which we consider to be an Indian context is yet another layer of imposition on the girl trying to forget or to disown her past, let's say.
Right.
So it just kind of adds a little bit of that. It's more. I mean, you can live with your chachas and chachis and mamis, but after a while it gets under your skin. Yeah. And if you're chief antagonist, you're forced to live with them. Oh, good luck with that. So that's what this is about.
Right. And so I think what I was trying to get at, and I think you beautifully answered, is that these situational living circumstances of the film were situational, but they can be applied to mental health and multi-generational families to send the bigger message out. And I think that was the point, was that, yes, this happened because of lockdown, but she's facing the identity crisis that she has. Is she British? Is she Indian? What should she do? Plus the society, and everyone's kind of ganging up on her to really question who she is, and to question what her real identity is outside of the masks and the physical masks that the characters wear. Now,
it's interesting because she looks Caucasian. She gets into an Indian community and suddenly she's the outsider, although she's from there. So it's very odd. And casting Kalki, I think, was such an advantage with that in mind. Because if you cast someone who looks a lot like Dipti, then you have this kind of, well, yes, of course they are, and they'll get along maybe. And, the struggles would be different. But if you are so starkly different from the person from whom you have emerged in some way, then it's almost a visual conflict, which is impossible to do in any other way.
And I think the importance of showing the NRI context is increasingly important, because I myself have been raised in Los Angeles my whole life, even though I'm well versed in my Indian roots. For example, I can resonate with Kalki's character, where we went through that phase of, are we American? Are we Indian? What percentage are we of each? What do we take? What do we leave? What are traditions? What are our values? And you start to answer those questions and learn. At first, it's a negation of, I'm not this because my external environment is deeply different than my internal environment. So you have that dramatic question of internal versus external conflict, which is always clashing, and it makes you want to do a different decision altogether. But I think Goldfish will resonate a lot with audiences about mental health, but also about identity first and foremost, especially with NRI audiences, because it's a question that we've all had to face being raised outside of India. Especially when you have parents that instill language or culture within you, you're deeply grateful for that. And you try to figure out, am I negating my internal culture because I want to fit into my Western society? And what is that right? It's a lot of questions. It's going against like the colonial mindset, so to speak, and figuring out who you truly are. And that's why I feel like the story resonates so well on top of the premise of mental health. The theme of identity is so crucial. Now, when it comes to Goldfish, bridging the gap between, let's say, the urban society and even the rural perspectives on dementia or mental health, how do you think this film is going to impact that sector of society?
Well, as I said, dementia itself within the picture is just an engine. It's a reason for it. It puts a clock on the thing, except the clock is fuzzy. It's a thriller as much as anything else, because you don't know when she's going to lose it, right?
Right.
And her own identity and herself. That's what the purpose of the clock is. So it's the engine. The conflict is the conflict between the mom and the daughter. I recognize, of course, that dementia is going to be one of the greatest health crises of that humanity has faced in a while. If I may be blunt, I just don't think the biological shell is meant to live as long as we kind of push it to. So, and the planet, bless it, is going to find a way to kill us, and it does so very effectively with this thing. And I think it's going to be that. It's going to be one of those things that we all have to live with. I haven't met a single person who in some way has not been affected either peripherally or absolutely centrally with this problem of Alzheimer's, dementia, or something like this. And the loss is doubly complicated because they look exactly as they did 4 years ago, 5 years ago. They look like a dad or mom, except they're no longer they no longer fill those metaphorical shoes, if you like. And I don't think that's an urban or a rural problem. I think it's a human problem. I read once of a study in the Kumbh Mela where 150,000 older people were left or abandoned, really, and lots of NGOs had to get involved and try and find homes for them, simply because they've lost their memories, they've been abandoned. And I don't know if this is an accurate representation of what happens. But then they try and find, they try to send them back home, and there are 1,500 Anils and 35,000 Ramgars, and it's very difficult to do this. And our feeling as a society is that the myth of us, the story we tell ourselves as a society, is we take care of our elderly, we live with them, we do it. Do we really? I mean, I've heard of the story of a woman living outside her home, quoting Wordsworth, but not being allowed in her house because her son has just thrown her out, and she can't remember her own name, but she can remember the daffodils. And it's a tragic tale that I've heard, and I just feel we should tell ourselves more real stories about love and fear and pragmatism and community and all of these things, as opposed to telling us the myth of ourselves and just being happy with it.
Wonderful insight. And I think it's not about the urban versus the rural, it's about the human connect, as you rightfully stated. And shifting gears a little bit towards the human connect you had to face during filming, what was it like working with the London production crew and just everybody that was non-Indian for this type of a film?
They were absolutely fantastic. And I can tell you that they all resonated with the text and the script. And it's such a human story that I think at some point, what community it was set in, the color sort of dissolved, and everyone saw people that were fading or they had lost within the story we were telling. The last scene, which I don't want to give away at all in this, when the two of them are by the window, I was filming that, and I looked over my shoulder at one point. I was quite focused on the window, as you might well imagine. I looked over my shoulder, and the entire crew was behind the camera watching it happen. And it is an extraordinary moment. And you think, oh, all right, okay, if they're all in it for this moment, which they have read before, and they have no reason to be in the room, and it's uncomfortable, and yet here they all are, you have to think maybe something is in this thing.
The story came to life and you see your first look at the audience.
Yeah. I mean, I had never, we do everything on laptops and computer systems, and it's a very lonely process mostly.
Yeah.
And because, filmmaking, for all its vagaries, is not necessarily done by committee. Sometimes, people get involved, but, it's pretty lonely cutting a picture. But when you finally see it in a film festival or something, and you're sitting with 300, 400 people watching this film, and they've suddenly got permission to laugh and cry in a collective, it's maybe the wrong. I've been in theater a long time, and I've seen this happen before. But it's almost a church-like atmosphere where you are permitted to respond in a particular way. There is a call from the screen. There is a response from the audience. And the best films, I think, don't tell you what to think or feel. Somehow they present something, and then the film occurs between the audience, in the aisle between the audience and the screen, and that is where the film is actually occurring. In some ways, that is where the connection is occurring. And this film leaves you. It has a last 4-minute shot while the credits roll. And normally, at the end of every film where computer graphics fight each other, at the end, people get up and applaud what they do, whatever they do, and they sort of get up and start moving. Very few people do. The lights come up, and there's usually a silence, and then you can hear the sort of tissues being put away, and you hear people shuffling, and then you hear deep sighs. And then sometimes the applause begins. But the applause is almost not for the picture. The applause is for how it has made you feel, and how you are connected with the people next to you. And watching that, Priyadarshini, I can tell you, it's absolutely a privilege. And there's no other medium that can do it quite as well, I think. Music, probably. Maybe theater and music, and I'm lucky to be part of all of that. But you can step back. I made this film a long time ago, and for me, it's in retrospect. For the people experiencing it right now, it's immediate, and that's a real privilege to watch. I don't know. It's a long rambling answer to a strange question.
No, I completely, I didn't want to interrupt you, but coming from my own education background, I kind of link that as a filmmaker myself. What you're talking about is a theory that we call narrative paradigm, where the narrative persuasion allows audience to be immersed in that story. And that leads to the transportation theory, where because you have a group viewing experience in a theater, you are all transported, just like you've mentioned, whether it's in a religious context, if someone's listening to a sermon in that group experience or listening to any motivational speech for that matter. And the audiences are transported into that storytelling world where it becomes one with their world. There is no screen that differentiates them. They are in that storytelling world, and that narrative just takes up from there, and they are active participants instead of just outside observers. And when that emotional connect happens, that's the emotional reaction I believe that you're seeing.
The interesting thing is, exposition is one of the great problems of filmmaking, right?
Right.
And in this film, no one is doing exposition about themselves. That's the interesting, because they already know their own stories. The most interesting thing that happened, and this is a lesson I learned from my first picture, is you don't really have to tell people the reasons for everything. You just have to present the drama. And if you draw the outlines, you find that the audiences or people watching it, whether it's in a single screen at home or within a theater together, they're filling in their own colors. Their own experiences are part of the movie. It's not, they're almost imposing their own experience within the movie. They'll find their reasons within it. It's like a good song. It doesn't tell you everything, but you're kind of filling in all the gaps with your own human and musical experience, or cinematic experience, or theatrical experience. And I just think that that's interesting. Over explaining things assumes that your audience doesn't know much, and that would be, in this kind of picture, kind of tragic, because you're expected in some ways to come to it with and be human and allow yourself to be that way. And you don't have to be, some kind of robot led by the nose to an emotional experience accompanied by violins. You don't do that. You kind of are quiet.
I love that. And yes, we also learn that in theory. We see that in real life. Connecting the dots is that narrative paradigm says, unlike rhetoric, is that stories are more convincing than a recollection of events. So when you are in a courtroom and you see the attorneys pleading to the jury, they're telling a story, not a recollection of events. And so then that makes the filmmaking process from the screen to personable, because it's not objective anymore, it's subjective, and they're placing themselves in that situation.
Yeah, but the facts are unimportant. The story is important, and the opinion is important, and the truth is important. And I think what we're trying to do is the transmission of the commonality of the human experience and the human condition. And even if that's, and films are only really, truly successful even if they're accompanied by, guns and warfare and whatever, and, fast cars. If that isn't at the core of it, you're not going to care about the people involved. And so the film will not really work for you. You can only wow us so much with, graphics and fancy ass shots. But, after a while, you're going to have to care about the people. And if you don't, then you don't have a movie.
Right. And so, Pushan, as we kind of wrap up this amazing conversation that we've had, what message would you like to convey to the viewers anticipating the release of Goldfish?
Just go see it. I mean, see it and comment on it and tell your friends about it if you like it. If you don't like it, do it. Because I think it's important. I mean, my job really as a practitioner of any kind, whether it's theater, film, music, is to provoke a response. And if I'm not provoking that response, if you say, oh, that was interesting, let's just get dinner, then I failed you, Priyadarshini. I really have. If beyond that moment you go to dinner and you're still chatting about the picture, or how the picture made you feel, or the picture that's or the picture makes you think about things a little bit differently and examine one's own life, whatever the response is, as long as there is one. I don't think that, apart from wow, there's a lot of responses on big screens anymore, and you're like, well, that was a great film, and then you've forgotten it by dessert. Do you know what I mean? And it's a bit, I think that's what Scorsese was talking about when he talks about, movies of a certain kind and cinema of a different. I think he made that distinction, which is very interesting to me. And, I'm just privileged to be part of your conversation 10 minutes after you've walked out of the theater. That's my job. and that's my privilege. So I just hope that people watch it, are provoked by it in some way, not negatively, obviously, but certainly provoked to think about things.
All right. Thank you so much, Pushan, for this wonderful conversation. And Rukus Avenue radio listeners, this is your correspondent, Priyadarshini G. Roy, signing off with the director of Goldfish, Pushan Kripalani. Until next time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Rukus Avenue